Most of you know that my my incident took place not too far from where you are today, and with that, it was deemed historically true. It was the first case to be deemed historically true in America, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a this mix of things that took place to have this happen, and so I want to get into a little bit of that. But what I wanted to focus on as well is the activity that's still happening there to this day. A lot of people aren't aware of that. And so, what I'd like to cover today, and I think it's my third year or so to be part of your conference. And so, I don't want to be redundant and talk about the same stuff I always talked about, but I do want to give you a little backstory as well. And so, with that, it was September 1st, 1969. And I was actually riding in a horse show in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And we had left and gone to our diner to close it up and make sure everything was ready for the following morning. And then we headed home, and we tried to take this shortcut, I guess. My mother used to like that little quick little dirt road that went through the bridge. It was a nice scenic type of thing, and it would get us home a little bit quicker. And so in doing so, when we came into the bridge and we're coming out the other side of it, if you will, really slow, was really bumpy, and you couldn't go more than 5 or 10 miles an hour. I was actually giving my brother a candy. And my grandmother had turned around from the passenger seat and just didn't think it was a good idea that he could choke. He was too young. And in doing so, she saw the sphere, if you will, off to the back of the car, rising from the river, the Housatonic River. And my brother was trying to look around me to see it, because this wasn't the first time we had seen something too. So it's important to mention that the actions that we had that night we weren't novice to the activity. There was a lot of activity in the area, but this was really the first time we had seen it so close. And so my brother was looking off to the right, something caught his eye, I guess, and there was a second sphere, which was smaller, orange, and had a roll to it inside. He refers to it as like an ocean wave moving inside of it. And so we kind of split the two. So you had one over here and one over here, and we went through it this way. And as we went about 20, 30 yards down the road, there was a telephone pole. And we stopped. My mother wanted to see the white sphere, because when that had rose up from the banks, it started to go in the same direction of our car. So we thought, well, let's stop and see if we can spot it again. But we didn't. What we saw in the back of the field, it's now a cornfield, but it wasn't then, was this large disc that was about 100 yards in size. And it looked very like a turtle shell, very simple. It had a skin to it that had lines in it. And within that skin, there was a little bit of a color that kind of bled through it. So you could make it out as it hung or hovered about 100 or 50 yards from our car, I guess. And it was the size of a football field. It was huge. And so while we were watching this thing and coming to a slow stop, we all felt like we were deep underwater, like there was a pressure change. My mother talks about that a lot, and almost suffocating. And there was this tapping sound underneath the car. It sounded like stones hitting the bottom of the car. And they were very loud to us, but everything else seemed muted, like when you're underneath a swimming pool. Certain things echo, while other things seem muted. And then there was this flash of light and crickets and the sounds of cicadas and frogs. Everything erupted, and then silent, then erupted. There was this dynamic, this change that I remember hearing. And I could see everybody in the car for a moment, like the dome light was on, but then it was off. And this kind of happened on and off for a moment or two. And that was the last thing I remember from being in the car. And we remember being in what looked like an airplane hangar. My mother and father were both pilots later on in life. And so I spent some time in the airplane hangars in Great Barrington. So I kind of know that was what's triggered the memory, if you will. And so it did. It looked like an airplane hangar. There was a tube of light. There was a tube of space, almost like fluorescent lights, where the ceiling met the wall. And I was grabbed really hard on my left arm. It hurt. And I was dragged or pushed and taken through this opening into a hallway, which was very simple by design. It was left, right. It wasn't really modern looking. It was kind of simple in design, if you will. It seemed very, almost like a military type of thing. It wasn't modern by any means. And so when I got down to this other end of the hallway, I was taken to the left and brought into a room, and there was a table and something that came down from the top of the ceiling, and I was placed on this table. The table rose and the top lowered, so it went like that. And the piece that came down over me had holes in the sides of it. It was like a cage, and just kind of covered me, but not tight to the table. And then the second piece came over it. So they kind of, one went over my body, the other one came over, and there were these holes that lined up on the sides. So these holes would, kind of, there'd be a part where they would just kind of be perfect like that. And then these hands came through and they put what looked like raisin packs on my body. And again, they were about, I don't know, size of a tennis ball maybe. And then I felt some, bumps to my head. And at one point, I actually had run out this room into a large area that looked like an empty Walmart. And it was a round area that had like these 3 hallways that joined it. So it was like a Y over a circle. And of course, I was taken back, and I saw some figures that looked, like an ant to me. It's actually in the Roswell Museum right now. The display with a lot of what I'm talking about is actually in Roswell. And so there was a lot of talk. My family afterwards, my brother shared what he remembered. My mother shared what happened to her. And my grandmother, she was the one who felt the most violated, if you will. That's kind of what happened that night. That's the key part of it. So it was about 8:30 at night. We left. We saw the objects probably around 8:45, and where we were parked would have put us in the middle of 3 objects, almost like a little bit of a pyramid, if you will. And so we had thought, why we felt the way that we did, that perhaps there was some type of communication between the 3 different objects, and we were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it was affecting us. And who knows who extracted us from the vehicle. But when my mother and grandmother were returned to the car, they were in opposite seats. My grandmother was now in the driver's seat while my mother was in the passenger seat. My brother was still to the right of me. My grandmother actually turned the car around and went back to town. Not my mother. My mother didn't come to till later on. So we did not actually come to at the same time either. So the next morning we opened up our diner, and sure enough, on the radio, Tom J from WSBS Radio was talking about how he had gotten calls the night before, and how he had actually got on the air and asked people if they were in the area to let them know where this object was, because he was getting calls and the police department was getting calls of something in the skies. And so the radio personality for the WSBS Radio, which is still in Great Barrington to this day, actually went back to the station, opened up the lines, and asked for help in conjunction with the Great Barrington Police Department. So that was 1969. So was that really the most important sighting or incident back then? Probably not, but it's the one that got the most press or coverage because it was actually on a holiday. It was Labor Day. And so a lot of people were outside with each other that didn't know each other that well. So there was a mix of people who weren't, let's say, friends, and they had no reason to cover for each other. So there was like 250 some odd witnesses that night. And it was seen from Pittsfield, Lenox, Stockbridge, all the way to Great Barrington, Sheffield, and even Canaan, Connecticut, where there was actually some cattle mutilations, which wasn't mentioned on Unsolved Mysteries, which is the show that most people remember, although that left out all the documentation. So here's kind of what happened. So back in the day, Sprague Electric, who was working with the space race or being funded indirectly by NASA, by our government, to make capacitors and different machinery to beat Russia to space, was also working with Berkshire Dynamics and Command Aerospace and Pratt & Whitney and General Electric. They were all kind of being funded at the same time. And so with that, our diner had a jukebox. And so a lot of these people that were working for these manufacturing facilities would actually come in our diner because we had, music, food. We were down the road from the racetrack, the horse track. And so a lot of those people that worked on the space race and those who worked on the goodwill message that was left on the moon 6 weeks prior to this sighting knew my mother and actually sat in our diner and listened to our jukebox. And so it had ties to the space race. So our diner seemed to be that spot where everybody could talk openly. So back in the day, you didn't talk too much about your father or your mother who worked on the secret space program. But in our diner, you kind of could. We didn't care. We weren't from the area. We were from New York. So it was an open forum. Talk about whatever you want. But because so many children and families actually saw it who didn't work for the space race, it became the hub for conversation. And so with that, there was a divide. There were a lot of kids that came in there who had seen something, who had drawn stuff in school and shared what they had seen, like Gina Paul and Melanie Kurzdorfer and myself, and a lot of other people. We drew these things and we actually taped our sketches or drawings on the chalkboard at Sheffield Center School. And so one of those actually hangs in Roswell to this day. We turned it into a negative, and it's now displayed in the Roswell Museum. So 67, I think I've got an article here from 1967, 2 years before the incident. There was a sighting, and if you look on the top left, it actually mentions Great Barrington, but on the bottom it mentions Sheffield Road, South Egremont. That was the first incident to make the press, not 1969, and that we were involved with as well. And then before that, there was one in 1966. So what happened with our family? In 67, we were talking about this openly. We were chastised. We were practically run out of town for being that family talking about UFOs. But in 69, when so many other people saw it over the holiday weekend, it was almost a reckoning. It was like, oh my God, we can come out and play again. You know what I mean? Without, having rocks thrown at us. So it was 69 was not an issue. 69 actually helped because so many other witnesses, were there and took part of it and shared what they saw. So where do we go now? So my father was approached by Robert Bletchman, an attorney in Manchester, Connecticut, who at the time was the public relations director for MUFON, Robert Bletchman. And he was working with Mohammed Ramadan at the United Nations with a focus on the Hudson River Valley sightings. And then there was this idea, did what happened over the Housatonic and its connection to the space race somehow carry over to the Hudson? Was there a bleed over? And so with that, my father was pushed a little bit by Bletchman to give the okay to talk about this at the United Nations. And he did. And so my father gave me a check for $500. Now this is 1992, to drop it off at Bletchman's office, and I think it was Broad Street in Manchester, where I met Robert myself. And I gave him the check for $500. He talked to me a lot about these. He showed me photos that he had of these crafts and so on underneath the Hudson River. Now we're going back to 1992. And so I was pretty amazed, and I sat down with him for hours and just talked to him about what I saw, and we felt comfortable. And Robert assured my father that, because my father also was in office. He was also a mayor in Canaan, and I think I've got that up here too. The Canaan Town Hall. And my father was in office for 2 terms, actually. He was backed by Senator Christopher Dodd as run for office. So my father had a little bit of weight behind him. He was a pillar in the community. And so with that, it would carry some weight, certainly back then. And so it did. It went before the United Nations in support of General Assembly 33-426 on October 2nd, 1992. My father lost his life on the same day. My father lost his life on October 2nd. Is that coincidence? I don't think so. You'll see there on the bottom left, 10/02/2006. So it says cardiac shock and sepsis, But the autopsy showed that my father had a deadly virus and bacteria in his blood. And so when the doctors were giving him high doses of augmentin and other antibiotics, it backfired on them. His temperature rose and he asphyxiated. So here we go. So our case goes before the United Nations. My father knows that there's ties to the space race. He knows there were other things being made back in the day that weren't just around UFOs. They're making weapons and everything else. He shares his thoughts with Bletchman. I drop off the check. It gets mentioned at the UN and my dad gets murdered. So because he was political, a lot of people wanted to do something for him in return. And so a lot of those kids that were in our diner back in the day, listening to the jukebox and riding to school together with the banana seat bikes and everything else, like, one of the judges who signed and sealed these documents for the state, Titus, felt, look, your mother was like a surrogate mom to us. She'd give us French fries and quarters for the jukebox, and you lost your father, and we saw it too. And so let's see what we can do with it. So the information went to the Great Barrington Historical Society. Ben Hansen contacted them on my behalf. Mike Barr, Don Schmidt, the Roswell Museum, all gave written testimonials to the Historical Society, along with a lot of other people. And they looked into it and found that it had gotten a CE classification, and you name it. There was radio archives. WSBS wrote a letter that they broadcasted. And then there was this attorney. She actually went to Roswell and utilized their research library to mine for information to be used for this determination in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so Roswell had a connection to our case also being tied in, or had a connection with our case and had this tie in with our case, the United Nations, my father being an attorney, the Historical Society, and these copies going to the governor's office. So the letters and the documentation that were mined in the Roswell UFO Museum's research library, that's a mouthful, were then needed to go before the courts to see if they were actually historical documents, or if they were actually could be used as source documentation, because they couldn't just use anything and go, oh my God, I thought that was a real document. And it wasn't. It had to be authenticated. And so that's what the attorney did. And so a stack of documents went back to the Great Barrington Historical Society. Copies went to the governor's office, and another copy went to the state's Historical Society. So where I'm going with this is that Roswell played a part in our case being inducted into history. So with that, once it did get inducted in 2015, the Roswell Daily newspaper wrote about it and actually contacted Debbie Auberman and the Historical Society. And they received a quote. And the quote was, for any incident to be deemed historically true, whether good or bad, it had to alter the natural progression of the community. And so they deemed that our diner and our family's incident had divided the community in such a way, like Billy the Kid altered the railroad, that our diner, which still sits in Sheffield, Massachusetts, is now a pizza house, was so important to the Berkshire County that it divided the entire community. That's how profound this was. Back in the day, there wasn't a whole lot of papers. I think one article went out on Channel 4 in New York City, but aside from that, there was a little local newspaper and a local radio station. So it never really got the traction some of the other ones did. But it's important because it also became the first case in America to be deemed historically true. There aren't people profiting on it. There's not people selling merchandise in town. A lot of people don't even like to talk about it. But it's an older, more private community, which also tells you that, this is there for a reason. I mean, a lot of people saw this. Nobody's making money on this thing. It cost me a fortune just to keep the place mowed. But it's history, and it's important because I lost my father over it. And we know we did. And so the UFO park, which is there now, I've tried to do something nice with that. I've tried to get sponsors. I've tried to reach out to other people who have lost loved ones, that were active with this topic. And so with that, I've got the daughter of BB King has donated a bench. Travis Walton has a bench there. Mike Barr, Unsolved Mysteries, Ancient Aliens paid for the entrance sign, donated money for the sculpture, and the son of Jimmy Vaughn from the Fabulous Thunderbirds, the brother of Stevie Ray, they have a bench there. I know Tyrone pretty well, nice guy. And so with that, I've tried to take something that was very horrible, heartfelt, disturbing, difficult for us, to do something nice with it. And so we have this beautiful park now. And so when I go, and I have been going on and off for years, I always wonder why I feel so odd when I'm there. And I'm finding that it's more than what I thought. So I went there with Anthony from Unidentified S4, great guy, by the way, great channel, and Rihanna Alley, who is producing a film for Amazon Prime. Mark D'Antonio, great guy, good friend. I think he's part of the show as well, or conference. And what the activity we found is astounding. It's still happening to this day. And so I saw some articles back in the 90s about crop circles. I saw some other articles about crop circles in 2013 and 2014. And I'm thinking to myself, are these people like, is there something going on there? Like they're just trying to do something fun or, keep it alive. But then it occurred to me, they don't even want to talk about it to begin with, right? So it wasn't for attention. And some of these actually got mainstream press. And I have some pictures of that too, from the papers. And so where I'm going with this originally happened in 1966. We saw it in 66, 67, 69. There was activity in the 90s. Now there's an awesome article. That's the actual article from the Great Barrington newspaper, Two Women Pursue UFO. That's the actual article from 1967. I actually got the license for that from the Berkshire Eagle because the Berkshire Eagle actually covered it. And so they gave me the rights to use that. And so there's another one here too, from 1996, I think. And if we could find out, that'd be great. And so where I'm going with this was not a one and done. There it is. That one's from the 90s. So I would encourage anybody who's got a few minutes to go to this park. Now, not just because it's my park. We're not selling anything. It doesn't cost anything to go. It's just a cool little spot to go. But the feelings you'll get, what you'll see will astound you. So let's jump ahead to that. So I was there with, again, S4, Unidentified S4, Rihanna Alley from Sky Tribe Mysteries and Sky Tribe Productions. And there was the orbs that were seen pretty much everywhere around the 17 to 18 foot corn, which doesn't grow like that anywhere else but in that area, that back side of the park. And we always wondered, what's in the soil? What could cause that? And so with that, it's been of interest. We've had scientists go down and take dirt samples to see if there's fluorescence in the soil, because sometimes people have seen what looks like their sneakers glowing at night. I've seen it myself, so I know what they're talking about. And of course, the corn is absolutely huge. The corn on the cob itself is probably 2 feet, if not bigger. Even that woman holding that right there, you can also look at her arm. That's almost as long as her arm from her wrist to her shoulder. Now, I like corn like everybody else, but I'm not eating that. So anyway, do we have anything from the spheres that are seen in broad daylight? I think I've got some pictures of that too. So that's a sphere seen over this probably 16, 18 foot corn. See it for yourself, go down, it's unbelievable. And so that is one of about 30 or 40 pictures that this woman sent me, taken in broad daylight. And then let's go back to that. So that's another orb, or that was seen inside the bridge. And think about this. When I was there in 1967 and 1969, what I saw was, a sphere, a white sphere. My brother first saw the orange one. We drove through the two of them, and they're still seeing these spheres to this day. So that seems to be what most people are witnessing in broad daylight. At night, broad daylight, cameras. This is not something you're going to go, oh my God, I went down there, spent 3 days and didn't see anything. That's not the case at all. This was taken just 3 weeks ago. That was probably 8 o'clock at night, maybe 8:30. That went whipping right by my head. I was standing right there when that was filmed. So,
all right, can you step away from the lighted device on the ground, please? You heard that beep? Yeah.
So that REM pod box was also going off in a way that I've never seen before. So we had taken this REM pod. We wanted to try a couple of different things. We put it on one side of the bridge, nothing. We put it in the bridge, and we started to go through the bridge to where our car stopped that night in 1969. We left it there. I felt uncomfortable. I started to feel upset, an upset stomach. Everybody was getting edgy for some reason. Those who know me, probably that's just the way you are. But everybody was feeling something odd going on, And so with that, all of a sudden the REM pod box starts going off. And Anthony's looking at it going, oh my God, I've never seen it act this extreme. And so he reset it, put it back down, boom, again. And as we brought the REM pod box back to the bridge, we waited, bang, it went off. Then we waited a little bit long, it went off. And by the time I got to the bridge itself, 50 minutes later, now this wasn't doing anything. Then all of a sudden, bang, it started going off. And by the way, Mark D'Antonio was actually there for some of this, I believe. And so with that, I felt the presence. I felt like I got pushed. I actually had lost my footing to make light of it. And so what I'm trying to tell you guys is, yes, we were part of something extraordinary. And we're the ones who spearheaded, the incident. But it's not just one incident. There's a lot of people that live there that are afraid to talk about this, that don't want to discuss it. If they lived in Colorado or somewhere a little more open-minded, it might be different. But I'm trying to do something for the community. I'm trying to give people a spot to go where they can share what they thought without ridicule. Something we wish we had, when I was a kid, I was fights all the time. I grew up tough, I grew up hard, I had to. I was small guy with a big mouth. And what else was I going to do, right? I was like a punching bag in school, right? And I'm not kidding. I'm dead serious. I mean, it was rough for us. My brother too, my mother, she had to sell the diner and we moved to Great Barrington, for a while until we moved to Canaan, Connecticut. And so, people can be mean, and so I'm sure there's a lot of you here today that have know exactly what I'm talking about, right? It's people can say some lousy things and it hurts, because it's not easy to put your heart out there and talk about something that's sensitive and personal and just to be ridiculed for it. So for today, I didn't really want to focus on so much on what actually happened because I've talked about it so often. It's, on the interviews I've done with you before. But I wanted to share where we're going, what we're looking to do, what we're trying to do. And so I've been up in the area with a film crew to add a lot of the detail that was left out of Unsolved Mysteries. They didn't put a single document in there that this is inducted historically as it's archived. This is an archived UFO incident, the first in America, which opens the doors for so many other people to follow that. Now we've actually got a case that is deemed historically true, but it gets shadowed by a lot of, whatever, right? So you don't hear too much about it. Jesse Waters talks about it once in a while. I've been on News Nation, that kind of thing. But we do have a bona fide UFO incident that is what, 3 hours from this conference. That is the first in America to be deemed true. And so with that, we are going to be calling out and interviewing those people who were part of this back in the day. There's so many people that still live there. They're still alive. Somebody from their family is still around. We've already filmed at WSBS Radio. They've given us their testimony. We've also filmed with Congressman Tim Burchett, and I got a picture of that. I was with him having drinks. Or actually, he doesn't drink. I was drinking. So I think he was having a coffee. But we met, had some lunch, and he's in our upcoming film. That'll focus on the park, which is not a couple hours away from you guys. And it's called Thom Reed's Berkshires UFO, not just Berkshires UFO. Let me tell you how that happened, too. Berkshires UFO was a website I had. And so Unsolved Mysteries used it, but they left my name out of it. And so a lot of people don't realize that the Berkshires UFO is just the name of a show. It's not actually a bona fide case or incident that you can, search on, Wikipedia or whatever. It's the Reed family incident, which got inducted. Now, I'll show those documents one more time. There's nothing in these documents from the state or what have you that mentioned Berkshire's UFO. It was the Reed family. So it was a rebrand, if you will. So Berkshire's UFO is a rebrand of our family's incident. But I'm glad that it also, there's Dave McDonald. Now, Dave McDonald, the director for MUFON, also got involved and wrote the Historical Society because it was Robert Blechman, the MUFON public relations director, that actually brought our case to the United Nations for my father. We didn't know what MUFON was. We didn't know any of that. My father was a politician. He had a Juris Doctorate in law. He's got a proclamation in his name. So that added some credibility to this case that a lot of other people didn't have. So they used our family's reputation or my father's pillar standing to add credibility to a case tied to the space race, was also making weapons, and then he dies on the same date. So Sprague Electric, I'd like to go back to that. Sprague Electric made the goodwill message that was left on the moon. That plant is still there to this day. That medallion or silicone disc was left on the moon 6 weeks before the 1969 incident, which, rebranded the Berkshires UFO incident. And so with that, a lot of people were looking up. A lot of people had the UFO thing in their head. They had space. They had the Apollo 11. Everybody was kind of in sync with what was going on, because even though it was a space race and we're still trying to beat Russia, we already did. We had already beat them to the moon. And so there was almost like a feeling of celebration. Like, back in the day, there wasn't a whole lot to feel good about, in a community of 3,000 people, right? So lucky we had television sets. And so with that, now people were open to it. They were actually talking a little bit more about it. And so when the sightings happened again on a holiday and so many people were together, it was on the tip of their tongue anyway. And that's how it got so popular. And basically discussed in our diner in Sheffield, because we were a couple miles down the road from the racetrack. So anybody with a couple of extra dollars ate, listened to the jukebox, bet on the horses, and they knew my family. Later on, my father gets contacted. He says, sure. And that's what happened. So with that, I'm not quite sure where to go with this, except for the fact that the activity is still happening. It's happening a lot. We saw the sky turn different colors. We were playing a certain frequency. I think it was 280 hertz, which is a sound that some people have referenced hearing there. And with that, it seemed to create some activity. Well, there were the spheres, the REM pod boxes going off. There was the corn, of course, which grows, probably almost twice normal size. There's crop circles in 2012, 2014, and again there were crop circles in the 90s. So this is an area that's in many ways, a lot of people say it's like just an active place. Like, there's some TV shows about certain spots, right? I'm going to mention right now, but this is an area though that's only about 100 yards in size. It's not like there's acres of ground to cover. I mean, you go over the bridge, you're there, and that's where the activity is. And so with that, let me see if there's anything else I could show you. So when my father lost his life, this was the environmental engineering truck that was outside his office window. If you see those two windows up above the ladder, that was my father's office. My brother, who was involved, has only done a couple shows. He was an ex-Marine, fugitive recovery agent. And the reason he doesn't talk too much anymore is because of the ridicule. It just, I think we all feel it's a little unfair. Now, some people ask, well, what kind of blood type do you have? And I have O negative, my brother's A negative, my mother's A negative, my wife, my ex-wife, she was AB negative, my son is AB negative. So there's an awful lot of us who have the Rh negative factor or blood type or what have you. So I also had to take a polygraph test. And so this, as you see the date, this was for the Historical Society in 2015. And I took that by a police detective. And that was almost like a 3-hour test. I don't think he could believe I was actually passing it. So let's see, what else do we have here? And again, that's Sprague's, one of Sprague's articles about the Goodwill message going to the moon. And if you go to Roswell, you'll see that, again, it's not the Berkshires UFO, it's a Reed family incident. And a lot of the articles are there. And that display where you see the UFO there's a plaque on the front of that references General Assembly 33-426 of the United Nations, which our family went in support of. And so something else I thought I'd mention too. So when we went to the United Nations, Linda Morton Howe was actually there, and so was Stanton Friedman. Now we're going back to 1992. Well, Stanton Friedman actually remembered our case from way back when, because it was one of the few going in support of the Hudson River, and we also went in support of Cash and Landerman in Texas. And so when our case was getting inducted into the museum, Stanton helped us. Stanton, actually, he was in my limo. We were bobbing around Roswell in my limousine. He was really happy that our case got to this point. And because he also knew my father was a reputable person, what happened. I mean, there's always been a little bit of that. I hope they do something with this kind of thing within some members of the community. And so with that, after Stanton passed, a friend of mine in Louisiana donated like a $10,000 telescope to our park. That telescope went in about 3 weeks ago. And can I see that again? Can we put that up again? And so that went in about 3 weeks ago. And that plaque right there that you see, that little, rectangle plaque, is a dedication to Stanton Friedman. And again, Stanton Friedman supported us. Now we're supporting Stanton. And so it's been getting a lot of attention. But again, just because you go through something tough doesn't mean you can't learn from that, grow from it, and do something for others. Find a way to put a positive spin on things, and that's kind of what we're doing. Am I making a lot of headway? I think I'm doing okay. I could be doing better, but there's so many cases out there, and so much is going on right now that at times it's hard to get that ear, but again, this is right in your backyard. And so with that, if you guys have an opportunity to go to Sheffield, we will be filming pretty much all week until Saturday. a contact on my website, which is ufopark.org or berkshiresufo.com. Feel free to reach out. And until then, thank you so much for having me.
Mr. Reed, Thomas, has retained our office for the purpose of looking at all the documentation and pulling it all together and seeing if we can get it before a judge, get it actually into a court system so that they can substantiate it, validate it. Obviously, we haven't looked at everything. There is a lot of things that he has, a lot of documentation, a lot of paperwork, over 100 pages alone just with the United Nations documents, and then try to present it to a judge. Our feeling is, just with what we've seen, that this is a real thing, it's a real deal. These people have truly gone through something.
Good night, guys. Thank you.